Under a starless sky, where the air is laden with the weight of unspoken tales, welcome to Whispering Shadows. Auguste Maujean here, your guide through the veiled stories of yesteryear. In this realm, where the line between myth and reality is but a shimmer, we explore narratives that stir the soul. Let us tread softly into the night's embrace. Step back to the cobblestone streets and thatched cottages of rural England. Tonight's story is The Phantom of St. Mark's Eve. On a crisp evening in late April, Dr. Edward Harlow alighted from the rattling carriage that had borne him over what could only generously be described as roads to the remote village nestled in the heart of the English countryside. His mission, rooted in academic curiosity, was to investigate the curious and somewhat macabre legend of the ghost of St. Mark's Eve, a tale that had piqued his scholarly interest but not his belief. As the carriage disappeared into the gathering dusk, he couldn't help but feel a stir of excitement, tempered with a healthy dose of skepticism. The village, as he observed while wandering its narrow cobblestone streets, exuded an air of rustic charm. Thatched cottages with smoke curling lazily from their chimneys lined the lanes, and ivy clung to ancient stone walls. Yet, as he passed, the villagers' wary glances and curt nods gave him a sense that beneath this idyllic veneer lay a deep-seated wariness, or perhaps fear, of the unknown or unexplained. It was in the dim light of the local inn that Harlow first encountered Mrs. Agnes Whitaker, a woman whose age was betrayed more by the lines of experience etched upon her face than by any hint of frailty in her posture. She was the self-appointed chronicler of the village's lore, and it was not long before Harlow was sat before the inn's hearth, utterly captivated by her recitation of the legend. "The phantom, Dr. Harlow," Mrs. Whitaker began, in a voice that wove a spell of its own, "is no mere spectre or ghost as you might find in other tales. It is said to be a harbinger, appearing on St. Mark's Eve to foretell death and misfortune." Her eyes, reflecting the fire's glow, seemed to look back through the years as she spoke of the phantom's past appearances and the tragedies that befell those it had marked. Later, as Harlow walked the village with Mrs. Whitaker, the weight of history seemed to press upon him. They passed the old church with its graveyard full of leaning stones, the ancient oak in the village green, and other landmarks, each with its own tale, each a thread in the tapestry of the legend. The villagers' reactions to his inquiries about the phantom varied. Some crossed themselves and hastened away, while others scoffed and dismissed the legend as nothing more than superstition. "Old wives' tales to scare children," one gruff old man declared, though Harlow noted the man's quick glance towards the churchyard as he spoke. As evening settled over the village, a sense of anticipation, tinged with dread, seemed to rise like a mist. It was palpable in the air, a silent undercurrent to the villagers' movements and conversations. In his room at the inn, Harlow sat by the window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. The academic in him questioned the wisdom of lending any credence to such a tale, yet the part of him that had always been drawn to the mysteries of the past, the unexplained corners of human experience, felt a deep and irrepressible curiosity. And so his decision was made. He would join the vigil in the churchyard on St. Mark's Eve, not as a believer, he told himself, but as an observer, a recorder of folklore and human belief. Dr. Edward Harlow, the rational historian, would witness this strange village ritual and perhaps glimpse the truth behind the legend of the phantom. The following morning dawned with a veil of mist draping the village, lending an ethereal quality to the ancient structures. Dr. Harlow found Mrs. Whitaker already awaiting him at the inn's modest dining hall. her demeanor bearing a solemnity befitting the day's peculiar significance. Over a breakfast of strong tea and freshly baked bread, she began to unravel further the enigmatic threads of the phantom's story. "The apparition," she began in a hushed tone, "is not merely a wisp of legend. It's been seen, Dr. Harlow, seen by eyes that could not and would not deceive." Her accounts of past sightings, detailed with the precision of a chronicler, spoke of a spectral figure emerging from the shadows on St. Mark's Eve, pointing its bony finger towards certain unfortunate souls who, tragically, were not long for this world. Harlow listened, his academic skepticism wrestling with the visceral power of her narrative. Mrs. Whittaker, sensing his internal struggle, leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My own great-grandfather," she confided, "saw the phantom when he was but a lad, and that very year he lost his sister and father to a fever that no doctor could explain." Later, as they walked through the village, the air seemed charged with a palpable tension. Doors were shut earlier than usual, curtains drawn tight. Even the birdsong, usually a cheerful symphony at this hour, felt subdued, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Harlow, in his conversations with the villagers, found that the legend of the phantom was not a singular narrative, but a tapestry woven from many threads. Each telling, while consistent in the core elements, carried its own unique embellishments or interpretations. One elderly woman, her eyes clouded with the years, spoke of a white owl that would fly over the churchyard on St. Mark's Eve, its hooting a harbinger of the phantom's arrival. A young lad, full of the bravado of youth, claimed his grandfather had once spoken to the phantom, receiving in return a prophecy of great fortune that led him to discover a hidden trove of Roman coins. As the day waned and the shadows lengthened, Harlow retired to his room at the inn. There he prepared both mentally and physically for the vigil. He dressed warmly against the chill night air and gathered a small lantern, a notebook and a pencil, tools of his trade as a scholar, his armor against the superstitions that seemed to grip the village. Outside, the day was surrendering to the night. Lights flickered and died in the windows of the cottages, and the streets emptied. The only sound was the distant murmur of the river, a constant companion to the village's nightly transformation. From his window, Harlow watched as the last vestiges of twilight faded, leaving the world outside enshrouded in a cloak of darkness. The stage was set, the actors in their places. Now, all that remained was for the phantom of St. Mark's Eve to make its dreaded appearance. With a mixture of apprehension and anticipation churning in his chest, Harlow extinguished his own light and set out for the churchyard, the beating of his heart a metronome counting down the minutes to midnight. As the solemn peal of the church bell echoed through the still evening, the villagers began their slow, almost processional march towards the ancient churchyard. Dr. Harlow, accompanied by Mrs. Whittaker, joined the silent congregation, each step taking them closer to the unknown that awaited them this St. Mark's Eve. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and old stone, as if the very ground they walked upon was exhaling centuries of hidden secrets. The churchyard, bathed in the ghostly light of a waning moon, presented an eerie tableau. The gnarled branches of yew trees, silhouetted against the sky, resembled skeletal hands grasping at the heavens. Gravestones, crooked and lichen-covered, stood as silent sentinels over the long-forgotten dead. A thin mist crept along the ground, wrapping the tombstones in a diaphanous shroud, and the wind whispered through the leaves, a mournful dirge for souls long departed. Among the gathering crowd, Harlow observed the quaint customs of the villagers, a curious amalgamation of fear and tradition. Some clutched sprigs of rosemary, believed to ward off evil spirits, while others murmured prayers or fingered rosary beads with fervent intensity. Their faces, illuminated by the flickering light of candles and lanterns, were etched with a blend of dread and awe, each person seemingly bound by a morbid fascination with the spectral ritual they were about to witness. Mrs. Whitaker, ever the custodian of local law, leaned close to Harlow and shared hushed stories of past vigils. "They say," she whispered, "that on one such night the phantom pointed to old Tom Barker, and not a fortnight later he was found dead, his face frozen in terror." Harlow listened, his rational mind grappling with the unsettling tales, each anecdote adding to the tapestry of superstition and mystery that cloaked the village. As midnight drew near, a palpable tension seized the crowd. The wind seemed to carry strange, inexplicable sounds, a distant rustling, a soft murmur that was neither human nor animal. Shadows appeared to shift and twist in the corners of Harlow's eyes, though when he turned to look, there was nothing but the stillness of the night. Mrs. Whitaker's voice, now barely audible, continued her litany of ghostly encounters. "And then there was the widow Sayers," she murmured. "The phantom appeared right before her, and she swore it bore the face of her late husband. She was never the same after that night, always looking over her shoulder, whispering to shadows." The church bell tolled again, its somber note hanging in the air like a premonition. The villagers fell silent, their eyes fixed on the ancient church, its weathered stones holding secrets of centuries. The atmosphere was electric, charged with a mix of fear and anticipation, as if the very fabric of reality was thinning, preparing to reveal what lay beyond. As the clock in the church tower continued its chime, marking the approach of midnight, Harlow felt a chill that had little to do with the night air. The final stroke of the bell resonated through the churchyard, signaling the hour of the phantom's imminent appearance. The moment of truth was at hand, and the veil between the known and the unknown was about to be lifted. In the churchyard, as the clock atop the ancient tower solemnly declared the arrival of midnight, a hushed silence descended, deep and complete, as if the very air had stilled in anticipation. The villagers, gathered around with lanterns flickering like will-o'-the-wisps in the gloom, waited with bated breath, their eyes fixed on the shadowed spaces between the gravestones. It was then that the phantom made its presence known. At first, it was but a mere wisp, a slight shimmering in the air, like the heat haze of a summer's day. Gradually, it coalesced into a form both ghastly and ethereal, causing a murmur of fear to ripple through the crowd. The figure was tall and shrouded in a cloak that seemed woven from the night itself, its edges fraying into mist. No face was visible under the deep cowl, only an inky darkness that drank in the moonlight. The phantom moved with a slow, inexorable grace, drifting among the tombstones. Its hand, skeletal and pale, emerged from the folds of its cloak, pointing with a languid yet deliberate gesture at specific individuals within the crowd. Each time its finger directed at a villager, a sharp intake of breath was heard, followed by a low, mournful wail of despair. The spectre's selections seemed arbitrary, yet those chosen reacted as if a cold hand had gripped their hearts, their faces turning ashen with dread. Dr. Harlow, though deeply unnerved by the apparition, fought to maintain his composure. His scholarly mind wrestled with the scene before him, seeking a rational explanation for what his eyes were witnessing. Could it be a trick of the light, an elaborate ruse played by the superstitious villagers, or perhaps some natural phenomenon yet undocumented by science? But before he could ponder further, the phantom vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. One moment it was there, an undeniable presence among the gravestones, and the next it was gone, leaving behind a void that seemed to echo with its silent passage. In the aftermath, the crowd was a mixture of relief and terror. Some hurried away, eager to escape the churchyard and its unearthly visitor, while others lingered, their conversations a whispered blend of fear and wonder. The air was thick with unspoken questions and half-formed theories, each person trying to make sense of what they had just experienced. For Harlow, the phantom's appearance and subsequent disappearance had stirred something within him. His initial skepticism, so firmly rooted in logic and reason, was now shaken by the undeniable reality of what he had seen. The apparition, with its silent, spectral judgment, had challenged his understanding of the world. The historian in him was deeply intrigued, compelled to unravel the mystery of the phantom of St. Mark's Eve. Despite his unease, Harlow knew that his investigation had only just begun, and the path ahead promised to lead him into realms both strange and unsettling. The morning after the phantom's visitation dawned over the village, a pale sun struggling to pierce the lingering mist that clung stubbornly to the ground. A peculiar tension, like the aftermath of a storm, hung in the air. Villagers moved about their daily routines with a marked unease, casting furtive glances towards the churchyard as if expecting some lingering spectre. Dr. Harlow, after a night of restless contemplation, set out to investigate the strange occurrences that had begun to ripple through the village. It was said that the milk had soured overnight in the houses of those the phantom had pointed at, and a horse, normally of a placid disposition, had become wild and unmanageable. Even the local flora seemed affected. A row of hawthorn bushes near the church had withered, their blossoms turned an ashen grey. Harlow approached the villagers with a methodical, rational mindset, interviewing those who had been marked by the phantom. Each recounted their experience with a mix of fear and resignation. A farmer spoke of waking to find his sturdiest plough cracked down the middle, as if struck by an unseen force. A young woman whispered of hearing a mournful wailing in the wind, a sound that no one else in her household could hear. With each account, Harlow felt the foundations of his skepticism begin to erode. The events, individually, could perhaps be dismissed as coincidence or superstition, but collectively they wove a tapestry of the inexplicable that challenged his understanding of the natural world. Mrs. Whitaker, in her role as the village's living archive, provided historical context to these events. "It's been this way for generations," she explained. "Each time the phantom appears, misfortune seems to follow those it chooses. It's as if it leaves a shadow over their lives." Her words painted a picture of a cycle of fear and mystery that had ensnared the village for as long as anyone could remember. The impact of the phantom's visit was palpable in the village's daily life. Conversations were hushed and tinged with anxiety. Plans were made with a cautious eye towards omens and portents. The very rhythm of the village had been altered, its heartbeat now synced to the spectral drum of the previous night's apparition. As Harlow continued his inquiries, the day waned, and the village found itself once more enveloped in the cloak of night. The setting sun cast long shadows that played tricks on the eye, and the wind seemed to carry whispers of unease. The villagers retreated to their homes, doors barred and curtains drawn tight against the gathering darkness. Harlow, standing alone in the now deserted street, looked towards the churchyard, its gravestones bathed in the eerie glow of the moon. The nightfall brought with it a renewed sense of apprehension, a collective holding of breath, as if the village itself feared what the darkness might bring. For Harlow, the night was no longer a time of rest, but a canvas upon which the unexplained danced, its shadows challenging the very nature of his beliefs. In the quiet, musty confines of the village archive, Dr. Harlow dedicated himself to the study of yellowed documents and time-worn manuscripts, searching for the elusive threads that might connect the present disturbances with the spectral lore of the past. The chill of the room, a repository of forgotten history, seemed fitting for his quest, as he sifted through accounts of village life dating back centuries. The more he read, the clearer it became that the phantom's appearances were no random occurrences. Each visitation, meticulously recorded by past generations, was aligned with a particular event or tragedy in the village. A fire that consumed half the settlement, a mysterious plague that decimated families, a series of unexplained disappearances. All had followed the phantom's pointing finger. Mrs. Whitaker, joining Harlow in his research, revealed a personal connection that added a poignant layer to the narrative. "My great-great-grandmother," she recounted, "was said to have been visited by the phantom in her youth. She lost her betrothed to the sea shortly thereafter, and always claimed it was the phantom's doing. Her tale, steeped in sorrow and loss, lent a human aspect to the legend, transforming it from mere superstition into a living, breathing part of the village's history." Patterns began to emerge, painting a picture of a phenomenon deeply intertwined with the life of the village. The phantom, it seemed, was not merely a harbinger of death, but also a mirror reflecting the community's darkest hours. Each appearance left an indelible mark on the village's collective memory, a ghostly footnote in its storied past. Harlow, his skepticism persistently gnawed by these revelations, found himself at a crossroads of belief and reason. The historian in him sought rational explanations, while the undeniable evidence of the past and present pointed towards something inexplicable, something that defied the logical confines of his understanding. It was in an old, leather-bound ledger that Harlow stumbled upon a breakthrough. A cryptic entry from the late 1600s spoke of a covenant made with a shadowed visitor to protect the village from an impending calamity. The language was veiled, the details scarce, but it hinted at a purpose and origin for the phantom far more complex than mere folklore. Armed with this knowledge, Harlow realized that mere observation would not suffice. He needed to engage with the mystery, to confront it in the very heart of its power. He resolved to hold a final vigil on the next St. Mark's Eve, not as a spectator, but as an active participant in the unfolding drama. He would stand in the churchyard, at the nexus of the past and the present, and perhaps there, at the intersection of legend and reality, he would find the answers he sought. As he outlined his plan to Mrs. Whitaker, her eyes reflected a mixture of admiration and concern. "Be careful, Dr. Harlow," she warned. "The phantom's world is not one to be trifled with." But Harlow's decision was made. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge the very boundaries of his beliefs, a meeting with the shadowed past that had haunted the village for generations. The following year, as the eve of the final vigil drew near, Dr. Harlow found himself in a reflective mood, his thoughts turning over the curious path that had led him from staunch skepticism to a place where belief in the supernatural seemed not only possible, but necessary. The village, with its time-worn charm and shadowed secrets, had slowly peeled away the layers of his disbelief, revealing a world where the unexplained danced tantalizingly just beyond the reach of logic and reason. His preparations for the confrontation were methodical, a blend of scientific inquiry and an acknowledgement of the mystical forces he was about to face. He gathered his notes, his lantern, and, as a nod to the villagers' beliefs, a sprig of rosemary tucked securely in his coat pocket. The tangible weight of these items was a comfort, a reminder of the tangible world he knew, even as he prepared to step into the unknown. Word of Harlow's intent had spread through the village, and the community's reaction was a complex tapestry of emotions. Some offered quiet words of encouragement, their eyes betraying a hope that perhaps this outsider could unravel the mystery that had loomed over their lives for generations. Others regarded him with a wary apprehension, fearful of what his actions might provoke. Mrs. Whitaker's support was unwavering. In their final conversation before the vigil, her insights into the village's history and her own family's experiences with the phantom served to strengthen Harlow's resolve. "There are more things in heaven and earth, Dr. Harlow," she said, echoing the words of the bard, "than are dreamt of in your philosophy." As dusk fell on St. Mark's Eve, Harlow, accompanied by a small group of villagers, made their way to the churchyard. The air was thick with anticipation, and the moon, a sliver of silver in the dark sky, cast long, eerie shadows among the gravestones. They waited, a huddle of lanterns and whispered prayers, as the church clock ticked inexorably towards midnight. Then, as the church bell tolled midnight, a hush fell over the gathered villagers. The air grew thick and heavy, as if reality itself was bending. Then, from the shadows between the gravestones, the phantom materialized. Its form was ethereal, more suggestion than substance, a swirling mist that coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape. A deep cowl obscured where a face should be, and tattered robes of shadow billowed around it. Despite its insubstantial nature, its presence was undeniable and commanding. Dr. Harlow felt his breath catch as the spectre glided among them. Its movements were silent and graceful, devoid of the menace he had expected. As it passed each villager, they shuddered but remained rooted in place, a mixture of awe and ancient fear in their eyes. Then the phantom turned to Harlow. He steeled himself, half expecting accusation or doom. But the spectral figure merely raised a misty arm, its finger pointing not at him, but beyond. Harlow followed its gesture. His gaze led to an old, neglected tombstone, half hidden by creeping ivy. With trembling hands, he brushed aside the foliage. The name carved into the weathered stone made his heart leap. It was the very individual mentioned in the cryptic ledger entry, the one who had made the mysterious covenant. In that moment, understanding crashed over Harlow like a wave. The phantom's true nature, its purpose, the reason for its centuries of vigil, it all became clear. This was no harbinger of doom, but a guardian, bound by an ancient pact to watch over the village. Its appearances, far from being omens of misfortune, were a form of protection. Each visitation served as a reminder of the village's resilience, a spectral echo of a long-ago act of sacrifice made to safeguard the community. As this revelation settled over him, Harlow sensed a change in the atmosphere. The oppressive dread that had permeated the churchyard began to lift. He turned to the villagers, seeing his own dawning realization reflected in their faces. The phantom, its long-guarded secret finally imparted, began to fade. Its form grew more translucent, wisps of mist trailing away on an unfelt breeze. As it disappeared, Harlow could have sworn he saw a nod of acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude, from the shadowy figure. Villagers, their faces now etched with relief rather than fear, began to disperse, a sense of closure settling over them like a gentle shroud. For Harlow, the experience was transformative. As he walked back to the inn under the starlit sky, he felt a deep peace. The world, with all its mysteries and wonders, had opened itself to him in a way he could never have imagined. The supernatural, once a realm of doubt and disbelief, had become an integral part of the tapestry of his understanding, a thread woven indelibly into the fabric of his being. The morning after the vigil, the village awoke not to the customary shroud of mystery and fear, but to a sense of peace that seemed to have settled upon it like a gentle summer dew. The air was clearer, the bird song more joyful, and even the old church, standing guard over its ancient graves, appeared less foreboding under the soft caress of the morning sun. Dr. Harlow, emerging from the inn, found Mrs. Whitaker already waiting for him, a sheaf of old papers in her hands. Together they delved into the records, piecing together the narrative that had eluded them. The tale that emerged was one of sorrow and sacrifice, a story of a village rector from centuries past who had struck a deal with a mysterious entity to save his parish from a dire plague. In return, he had bound himself and his lineage to the Phantom, a spectral guardian that would watch over the village through the ages. This revelation cast the Phantom's appearance in a new light. Far from being a harbinger of doom, it had been a silent, watchful protector, its presence a testament to a long-ago act of selflessness. The seemingly ominous events that had followed its visits, the souring of milk, the strange behavior of animals, the unexpected misfortunes, were now seen not as curses, but as mere coincidences, misfortunes of ordinary village life, mistakenly attributed to the Phantom due to entrenched superstitions and fears. The villagers, gathering to hear the truth of their spectral visitor, listened with a mix of awe and relief. The fear that had clung to them for generations dissipated, replaced by a sense of gratitude for the unseen guardian of their ancestors. As Harlow made his way to the carriage that would take him away from the village, he carried with him more than just notes and memories. He carried a new perspective on folklore and the supernatural, an awareness that the world was filled with wonders and mysteries waiting to be explored. The enigma of the Phantom of St. Mark's Eve had been solved, but in its resolution, it had opened the door to a myriad of other mysteries, each beckoning with its own whispered secrets. As the carriage rolled away, leaving the village behind, Harlow gazed out at the passing landscape, his mind alive with possibilities. The world, he knew, was a tapestry woven from the threads of the known and the unknown, and he was more determined than ever to unravel its mysteries, wherever they might lead. The end of our story is but the beginning of your journey. If tonight's tale has chilled and charmed you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Auguste Maujean, your narrator in the night, will be here in whispering shadows, with more stories to unfold.